Maaser chapter 10, 1. When a person makes a commitment to be considered trustworthy with regard to the tithe, so that his produce will not be considered as demai, he must tithe the produce he eats, that which he sells, and that which he purchases, and he must not accept the hospitality of a common person. He must make these commitments in public. When trustworthy witnesses testify that he made these commitments in public, and that he continually observed these practices, he is considered trustworthy, and his word is accepted if he says that his produce has been tithed too. Every Torah scholar is already considered trustworthy. There is no necessity to investigate his conduct. His children, the members of his household, his servants, and his wife are given the same status. When a Torah scholar dies and leaves produce, even if it was gathered on the day of his death, we assume that the appropriate separations were made. 3. When the daughter of a common person or his wife marries a chaver, or the servant of a common person was sold to a chaver, they must accept the above requirements at the outset. When the daughter of a chaver or his wife marries a common person or the servant of a chaver were sold to a common person, we assume that they maintain their observance until they act in a manner that arouses suspicion. A son or a servant of a chaver who would frequently visit a common person must formally accept the above requirements. When a son or a servant of a common person would frequently visit a chaver, as long as he is in his domain, he is considered like a chaver. When he departs, he is considered as a common person. 4. When a person himself is not considered as trustworthy, but one of his sons or servants or another member of his family is, food may be taken from him based on their statements. We do not harbor suspicions concerning the matter. 5. If a person was considered trustworthy, but his wife was not considered trustworthy, we may purchase produce from him, but we do not accept his hospitality. If his wife is trustworthy and he is not, we may accept his hospitality, but we do not purchase from him. May a curse be visited on one whose wife is trustworthy, but he is not. 6. A chaver should not serve as a waiter at a drinking party or a feast of a common person unless all the food and drink have been tithed and the appropriate separations made under his supervision. Therefore, if one sees a chaver serving at a drinking party or a feast of a common person, he can operate under the presumption that the tithes and other separations have been made. If we see such a person eating together with a common person, we cannot assume that the food served at the feast has been tithed. Perhaps the chaver is relying on the stipulations made in his heart. 7. Just as a person may eat with a common person and rely on the conditions of his heart, so too he must make a stipulation with regard to what his son eats. This applies even if his son is in another place. He does not have to make a stipulation with regard to another person aside from the son, even if that person was together with him at the feast. Therefore, if the son of a chaver is present at the feast with a common person, we cannot assume that the food was tithed, for perhaps the chaver made a stipulation for the food his son ate. 8. When a common person gives a ma'ah to a chaver and tells him, buy me a bunch of vegetables or a cake, he may purchase it for him without any qualification and is not obligated to tithe it. If the agent exchanged the ma'ah, he is obligated to tithe the produce he purchased. If the chaver was explicit and did not buy the produce without explanation, but instead said, this bunch of produce that I'm purchasing from you is being bought from my colleague, and this bunch is being bought for myself, he is obligated to tithe only the produce that he took for himself. He does not have to tithe the bunch he purchased for his colleague. If these two batches of produce became intermingled, even if one measure belonging to the chaver becomes mixed with 100 belonging to the common person, he must make the separations as if the entire quantity was the my only. Afterwards, may he give the produce to the colleague who sent him to purchase them for him. 9. When 5 people tell one person, bring us 5 bunches of vegetables, and the agent brings each person one bunch individually, the chaverim among the recipients are required to tithe only their portions. If the agent brought the entire quantity mixed together, the chaverim among the recipients are required to separate tithes for the entire amount. 10. When a common person tells a chaver, collect figs for me from my fig tree, the chaver may snack from them and tie them as one tithes to my. If a chaver told a common person to gather figs for him and another chaver heard him, the latter may partake of the figs without tithing them. The rationale is that a chaver will not release produce from his domain unless the appropriate separations were made. Thus, we can assume that the owner separated truma and the tithes for this produce from other produce. Although generally we do not suspect that a chaver will separate truma from produce that is not in the same place as the truma, he may do so to prevent the common person from confronting a spiritual stumbling block. 11. It is permitted to feed the mai to the poor and to guests. They must, however, be notified of such. If the poor person or the guest desire to make the appropriate separations, they should. 12. The collectors of charity collect from all people without clarifying whether separations have been made, and they divide the donations without specifications. If one desires to make the appropriate separations, he should. 13. When a doctor who is a chaver is feeding a common person who is sick from the produce of a common person, he should place the food in his hand, but not in his mouth. If the demai belonged to the doctor, he should not even place it in his hand. And similarly, if he knows that it is definitely tevel, it is forbidden to place it in his hand. Maaser chapter 11. 1. It is forbidden to sell demai to a common person or to send demai as a present to a common person because one assists him in partaking of forbidden food. It can, however, be sold or sent to a Torah scholar, for a Torah scholar will not partake of it unless he tithes it or until a trustworthy person tells him that it has been tithed. 2. Of all those who add to the measure when they sell in large quantities, e.g., wholesalers and grain merchants are permitted to sell and send demai as a present. Since they add to the measure, our sages ordained the purchaser or the recipient be the one who separates the tithes from the demai. When, by contrast, people measure with a small measure, since the seller is the one who profits, he should make the separations. Hence, he should not sell or send produce unless the appropriate separations have been made. 3. What is meant by a large measure? With regard to dry measure, half a saw. With regard to liquid measure, something that holds a dinar's worth of said liquid. 4. Even though a person sells baskets of olives and grapes or containers of vegetables, by estimation, he is forbidden to sell them as the my 5. If one of them, either the seller or the buyer, whether the sale is made with a small measure or a large measure, says, "Come, let us make the separations for this produce," the seller should separate Tammuz Maaser, and the purchaser should separate the second tithe. This is an edict of the court. 6. When a chaver or a common person inherit the estate of their father, who was a common person, chav may say, "Take the wheat in this and this place, and I will take the wheat in this and that place. Take the wine in this and this place, and I will take the wine in this and that place." He should not say, "Take wheat, and I will take the barley. Take the produce that is fresh, and I will take what is dry." For this is considered as selling demai. 7. When a person is carrying a loaf of vegetables, his load becomes heavy for him, and he desires to cast some vegetables on the road to lessen his burden. He should not cast them away until he tithes them. This is necessary so that shall not create a stumbling block for the common person who consumed demai. 8. When a person purchases vegetables from the market and draws them into his possession, even though he did not weigh them, measure them, or pay for them, if he changes his mind and returns them to the owner of the store, you should not return them until he tithes them. 9. The following laws apply when a person discovers produce on the way. If the majority of the local populace bring the produce to their homes, he is not required to tithe it, for the obligation to tithe is not yet taken effect. If, however, the majority bring it to sell in the marketplace, it is considered as demai. If the ratio is half and half, it is considered as demai. 10. If a person took the produce with the intent of partaking of it and changes his mind to decide to store it, he should not keep it until he tithes it, so that it will not present a stumbling block to others. If he took it originally only so that it will not perish, he can store it until he desires to partake of it, send it as a present, or sell it. At that point, he should tithe it as demai. 11. The extremities of vegetables that are found in a garden are exempt from the laws of demai. Those that belong to a homeowner and found in his home are obligated to be tithed. Those on a dung heap, wherever it is found, are permitted. 12. When a person gives produce to a female innkeeper to cook or bake for him, he must tithe what he gives her, lest it present a stumbling block to others, and what he receives from her, for she is subject to exchange produce belonging to one person for that belonging to another. He may, by contrast, give produce to his mother-in-law, whether her daughter is his orusa or his wife, or to his neighbor to cook or bake for him, and he need not show concern neither for tithes nor for produce of the Sabbatic year, because these individuals are not suspect to exchange produce. When does the above apply? When he also gave her yeast for a dough and spices for a cooked dish. If he did not, we must show concern because of the tithes and because of the produce of the Sabbatic year. Therefore, in the Sabbatic year, the bread is forbidden, for perhaps the yeast came from produce that grew in the Sabbatic year. 13. When a person brings wheat to a miller who is a common person, he may assume that their status is unchanged. He is not suspect to exchange it for other wheat. If he brought them to a Gentile miller, they are demai. We suspect that he exchanged it for the wheat of a common person. Similarly, if one entrusts produce to a common person for safekeeping, it is permitted. He is not suspect to exchange the produce entrusted to him. 14. When a common person is managing a store belonging to a chaver, it is permitted to partake of the produce. We do not suspect that he exchanged it. This applies even if the chaver only goes in and out of the store from time to time. 15. When the produce was entrusted to a Gentile for safekeeping, the produce one receives is considered as the Gentile's produce, for we assume that he exchanged it for his own produce. What are the laws that govern it? If the tasks necessary to prepare the produce were not completed as of yet, and they were completed by the Jew after he took back the produce he entrusted, he must separate the tithes as we explained. If the produce that he entrusted was tevel, and the tasks necessary for its preparation were completed, he is obligated to separate the tithes, for perhaps the Gentile did not exchange it for this reason. It appears to me that the status of the tithes he separates is doubtful. If he entrusted an ordinary produce from which the required separations were made, he is not obligated to separate anything, for even if the Gentile exchanged it for his own, it is exempt, as we explained in Hilchos Tumas. The obligation to tithe is on your grain and not the grain of a Gentile. Maaser chapter 12, 1. When a person purchases produce from a person on whom we do not rely with regard to the tithe, and forgot to tithe it before the commencement of the Shabbos or a festival upon which he may not tithe it, you should ask that person regarding their status. If he tells them that it is tithe, you may rely on his word on that Shabbos. Similarly, if another person upon whom we cannot rely tells him it was tithe, he may partake of it because of his word on that Shabbos. This applies even if he possesses other produce of that type from which the separations have been made. The rationale is that the all of Shabbos affects the common people and they will not violate a transgression on the day. The Rebbe quotes this halacha very often. 2. Even though one relies on the word of a common person to eat on Shabbos, you should not partake of that produce after the conclusion of the Shabbos until he separates the tithes as appropriate for a demai for the entire amount. What he ate on the Shabbos and what remains for the leniency to trust him was granted only out of the necessity for that Shabbos. If the Shabbos and a festival followed in succession, if one asked the common person concerning produce on one, he may partake of it on the other because he did not have the opportunity to tithe in the interim. Similar laws apply with regard to the 2 days for each festival celebrated in the diaspora. 3. When a person takes an oath that a colleague partake of his hospitality on the Shabbos, the guest does not trust the host with regard to tithes, he may ask him, and he's based on his statements the first Shabbos. On the second Shabbos, even though he took an oath not to benefit from him unless he accepts his hospitality, he should not eat until he tithes, as one does for Demai 4. When we see a person who is not trustworthy with regard to the separation of tithes, separate Tammuz Maaser from produce belonging to him, that is Demai, and we saw that it later fell back in, whether to that store or of produce or another. And he said, I separated it. We accept his word even during the week and may take of the produce on that basis. Just as the common people are in dread of the Shabbos, so too they're in dread of Dimua. And they are not suspect to cause others to partake of such produce. 5. When we see that a person who is not trustworthy separates the first tithe from such produce, and he says that he separated the second tithe, his word is accepted. If he separated the second tithe in our presence and said that he separated the first tithe, his word is not accepted because the second tithe belongs to him. Thus, one who is trusted with regard to the second tithe is not trusted with regard to the first, but one who is trusted with regard to the first is trusted with regard to the second. Accordingly, when a person who was not trusted brings produce from his home and says this is the first tithe, his word is accepted and there is no need to separate trumas and tithes from the produce separate. If he says this is the second tithe, his word is not accepted. The produce separated is considered as the mai. We must separate Tammuz Maaser from it. It appears to me that he must redeem the entire amount. 6. When one tells a person whose word is not accepted with regard to the tithes, purchase produce from me who tithes, and that person went and brought him produce, his word is not accepted. If he told him, purchase produce for me from so-and-so, the other person's word is accepted, and if he says that he purchased it from him, for he will fear to lie, lest the principal ask that person. If he went to purchase the produce from the person who was named but said, I could not find him, so I purchased it for you from another person who was trustworthy, his word is not accepted. 7. The following rules apply when a person enters a city where he does not know anyone and asks, who is trustworthy? Who tithes? If someone answers, I am, his word is not accepted. If he says so-and-so, his word is accepted. And the wayfarer may purchase produce from that person and eat on that basis. If the wayfarer went to purchase from that person and asks him who sells vintage wine, the person answers, the one who sent you, his word is accepted, even though it appears they are in collusion. 8. When does the above apply? When the wayfarer is not familiar with any person in that place. If whoever is familiar with people there, he should purchase only from a person with an established reputation for observance. If he stays in that place for 30 days, even if he is not familiar with anyone there, he should purchase produce only from an expert. 9. These leniencies were granted only with regard to Hermes and the tithes, but with regard to the produce of the sabbatical year and questions of ritual purity, one should purchase only from a person who has an established reputation, for observance. 10. When donkey drivers enter a city, one says the appropriate separations have not been made from my produce, but they have been made from my colleague's produce. His word is not accepted. We fear that they are colluding in deception. 11. When a person sells produce in Syria and says that it comes from Eretz Yisrael, the purchaser is required to tithe it. If he says that it has been tithed, his word is accepted. The rationale is that the same person whose words aroused our suspicion also allayed it. If he says that they are mine, the purchaser is obligated to tithe it. If he says that it has been tithed, his word is accepted. The rationale is that the same statement that aroused our suspicion also allayed it. If it is known that the seller owns land in Syria and most of the produce he sells is from his own field, one who purchases from him is obligated to tithe, for we assume that he brought the produce from his own field. 12. When poor people say, this produce is from Leket Shechampeh, their word is accepted as long as there are granaries in which Leket Shechampeh can be found, and provided a poor person is close enough to the granaries that he can go to it and return on the same day. If they said they are from tithes given to the poor, their word is accepted throughout those years. The word of these individuals is accepted only with regard to the objects which people would ordinarily give to the poor. 13. What is applied? Poor people say this wheat is from Leket Shechampeh. Their word is accepted. They say this flour from Leket Shechampeh. Their word is not accepted. Needless to say, their word is not accepted when they say that bread comes from persons to the poor. Instead, articles should be tithed as the Mai 14. Similarly, the word is accepted with regard to kernels of rice, while in their husks. The word is not accepted, however, with regard to husked kernels or cooked ones. The word is accepted with regards to beans in their kernels. Their word is not accepted, however, with regard to raw husked beans or cooked beans. Their word is accepted when they say that oil was from the tithe for the poor. Their word is not accepted, however, if they say it comes from leftover olives. Their word is accepted with regard to raw vegetables, but not with regard to cooked vegetables unless we are speaking about a small quantity, for it is customary for homeowners to give a poor person some vegetables in their pot, and since he can say a homeowner gave it to me, he can say, I cooked it from the presents given me. 15. Similarly, the word of a Levite who says this produce is from the first tithe from which Truma was separated is always accepted with regard to Truma's Maaser, just as the word of an Israelite is always accepted with regard to the great Truma. The Levite's word is not accepted with regard to exempting the grain from the second tithe. 16. All the above applies with regard to a common person who is neither suspect to violate these prohibitions nor trustworthy in the observant. If whoever someone is suspected of selling truma as ordinary produce is forbidden to purchase anything from him that has a connection to truma and the tithe, even the intestines of fish may not be purchased from him because oil is mixed with them. It is, however, only forbidden to purchase the produce that is being sold by such a person at that time. It is, by contrast, permitted to purchase from his storehouse because he will fear to mix truma in his stores of produce lest the matter become known and he will lose everything. Similarly, it is forbidden to purchase anything that has connection to tithes from a person who is suspect of selling the second tithe as ordinary produce. All this is a penalty imposed by a rabbinic decree. 17. When a person who is suspect to transgress attests that a tithe is being separated from produce belonging to another person, his word is accepted. The rationales that we operate under the presumption that a person will not sin without receiving any benefit. Needless to say, this applies with regard to a common person. Therefore, a common person says, if a common person says this produce is tevel and this is truma, this is definitely untithed, this is the mai, his word is accepted even with regard to his own produce. If he said the required separations have been made from this produce, his word is accepted with regard to the produce of others, provided it does not appear that they are acting in collusion, as we explained. 18. When a person sells produce to a colleague and after the produce leaves his hand, he tells the purchaser the produce I sold you was tevel, that the meat is meat from a firstborn animal, and the wine is wine that was poured as libation to a false deity. The letter of the law dictates that the seller's word should not be accepted even if he is a chaver. A person who is eager should be stringent with himself. If he accepts his word, his conduct is praiseworthy, even if the seller is a common person.